Have you ever met a man who seemed perfect on the surface? Charming, confident, saying all the right things. He knew how to listen just enough, touch just gently enough, and promise just deeply enough to make you believe he was everything you'd been waiting for. But something didn't feel quite right. Not at first. At first, you felt chosen, seen, desired. You told yourself you were overthinking, that maybe this time it was real, until the cracks appeared. He stopped asking about your feelings. He started dismissing your instincts. He withdrew, then blamed you for not trying harder. You gave more, hoped more, bent yourself further. And still he remained distant, unpredictable, unreachable. Carl Jung warned us about this kind of man. He's the one who never faced his own darkness. The man who wears a mask so well. Even he believes it's real. But underneath, emotional emptiness. A refusal to grow. A fear so deep he can't even name it, so instead, he makes you question your own. This isn't about good guys versus bad guys. It's about unconscious men. Men who have never been initiated into their own psyche. Men who never turned inward, who never examined their wounds, who never met their inner child, let alone cared for him. And here's the danger. These men don't come waving red flags. They come wrapped in charisma, carrying smiles, speaking love like poetry. But what they offer is not love. It's dependency. It's confusion. It's the slow erosion of your intuition until one day you wake up wondering when you lost yourself. Jung called this the shadow. Everything we refuse to see in ourselves, we end up projecting onto others. And some men, instead of facing that shadow, use women to carry it for them. They don't know they're doing it. But you feel it. In your body. In your silence. In your shrinking voice. And here's what no one tells you. It's not your job to fix him. Not your role to stay until he becomes who you thought he was. Your love cannot rescue a man who is committed to remaining unconscious. If this feels familiar, you are not alone. If you've ever been in a relationship that left you feeling invisible, confused, or drained, this video is for you. Because we're not just going to expose the traits of these men. We're going to understand why they act this way, what Jung saw in the male psyche, and how women can protect their energy, honor their depth, and finally stop making excuses for emotional immaturity. So before we go deeper, ask yourself, have you ever loved someone who made you feel like you were disappearing? Have you ever cried quietly in the presence of someone who claimed to care? If the answer is yes, don't just watch, engage. Subscribe to this channel. Comment below. I've been there. Because today, we begin the process of remembering who you are. Today, we begin to name the patterns no one warned you about. And once you see them, you can never unsee them. Let's begin. They don't come as villains. That's the first trap. The kind of man that makes a woman lose herself rarely looks dangerous. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't break things. He doesn't wear cruelty like a badge. In fact, he's often the opposite: soft-spoken, articulate, maybe even emotionally expressive in just the right doses. And that's precisely why so many women don't see it coming. Carl Jung said that whatever we do not bring into consciousness appears in our lives as fate. And for many women, that fate arrives wearing a smile, quoting poetry, holding your hand while you fall into the very trap he doesn't even know he's building. The first type is the mirror man. He reflects back exactly what you need to see at first. He listens. He agrees. He tells you everything you've wanted to hear for years. He seems to get you in ways no one else has. But slowly, subtly, something changes. He begins to fade. His own depth disappears. The relationship starts to feel one-sided, not in effort, but in authenticity. You realize he was never really there. He was mirroring you, adapting to your desires, molding himself into your ideal. But the man behind the mask never existed. And now you're alone in a relationship built on an illusion. Then there's the wounded prophet. He's deep. He's spiritual. He talks about the universe, about healing, about his past pain. You feel pulled in because he feels different, vulnerable, raw. But soon you find yourself becoming his therapist, his healer, his emotional crutch. He hasn't healed. He's romanticized his wounds. He uses his pain as a shield, a justification, a performance. His trauma becomes the center of your connection, and yours becomes invisible. He speaks of growth, but avoids the real work. He makes you feel like the connection is sacred, but in truth, you're just another place for him to bleed without ever cleaning the wound. The third is the performer. This one knows how to play the game. He's magnetic, socially intelligent, always knows the right thing to say. He'll write you poems, plan grand gestures, and say he's never met anyone like you. And for a while, it's intoxicating. You think you've finally found someone who sees you, but the performer is addicted to validation, not love, not truth. You were a role, not a person, a muse to keep his ego inflated. And once you stop applauding, once you start asking for presence over performance, he vanishes. Or worse, he blames you for not appreciating the show. Then there's the fixer, not the one who fixes you, but the one who wants you to fix him. He comes in fragments, holding out broken pieces, asking you to put him back together. He doesn't say it directly, but you feel it. His sadness draws you in. His instability makes you feel needed. You confuse your empathy for love. And while you pour all your energy into helping him become the man he could be, you slowly stop being the woman you are. Your dreams go on pause. Your needs shrink. Your intuition gets quieter. And when you finally collapse from emotional exhaustion, he either leaves or accuses you of giving up on him. And finally, the intellectual. He's brilliant, articulate, aware. He'll quote philosophers, debate politics, and talk about consciousness and meaning. But he lives entirely in the mind. Emotions confuse him. Vulnerability repels him. He dismisses feelings as irrational. And so, when you cry, he gets analytical. When you express a need, he critiques your language. He doesn't abuse. He invalidates quietly, systematically. You begin to second-guess your emotions. You start to believe that maybe you are too sensitive, too messy, too emotional. But you're not. You're just human, and he can't meet you there. These types are not villains. They're men who haven't done the inner work, men who haven't faced their shadow. And because they haven't, they force the women who love them to carry that darkness for them. Not by demand, by default. Because Jung taught us that what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves, we cast onto others. And some men cast their unlived lives onto the women they love, their unprocessed grief, their unmet expectations, their unacknowledged needs. And women, taught to love through sacrifice, through patience, through endurance, absorb it. Not because they're weak, but because they are deep. But here's the truth. No matter how much light you bring, you cannot illuminate a man's soul if he has boarded up all the windows. You cannot love someone into awareness. You cannot carry both your healing and his refusal to heal. And the longer you try, the more invisible you become to yourself. Because that's what these kinds of men do. Not deliberately, but inevitably. They make you disappear, bit by bit, day by day. Your laughter dims, your confidence erodes, your intuition weakens, until one day, you find yourself apologizing for having needs, explaining your worth, defending your right to be seen. And that is the ultimate betrayal. Not his betrayal of you, but your betrayal of yourself. This is not a video to shame men. It's not about hate, it's about clarity. Because the only way out of the trap is to name it, to see the pattern, to stop thinking it was your fault that he couldn't love you in the way you needed, to stop believing you weren't enough for a man who was never available in the first place. And more than anything, to start asking a different question. Not, how do I make him love me? But, what is it in me that keeps calling this kind of man into my life? That question is not self-blame. It's self-liberation. Because once you see the trap, you no longer step into it. And once you name the mask, you can begin to seek what's real. Carl Jung believed that the psyche is not isolated, that every individual mind is also shaped by something larger, what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of instincts, archetypes, and patterns that influence human behavior across generations. And when it comes to men, particularly emotionally immature, Jung saw something deeply unsettling hiding within that collective shadow. Immaturity is not about age, it's about avoidance. The men Jung warned us about are not defined by their failure to grow older, but by their failure to grow inward. These are men who refuse the process of individuation, the psychological journey of becoming whole, and in doing so, they remain fragments, echoes of expectations they inherited, performances they perfected, but never personalities they embodied. They live in personas, masks, appearances, roles assigned by culture, family, and fear. And beneath all of it, a great void. Not because they are empty, but because they are unformed. Jung saw this all the time. Men who had built impressive outer lives, careers, titles, bodies, intellect, but inside, were still boys. Not innocent boys. Not open-hearted, curious, playful boys. But wounded, exiled, disconnected, boys hiding behind adult facades. These men have not met their inner feminine, their feeling, intuitive, relational side. They dismiss it as weakness. And because of this, they remain emotionally stunted, unreachable, and often dangerous. Not in a violent way, but in the most insidious way emotionally. Jung wrote that a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. The emotionally immature man has not passed through anything. He avoids fire. He avoids friction. He avoids anything that would force him to confront the messiness of his own psyche. Instead, he uses women to process what he refuses to face. The woman becomes the container for his confusion, the mirror for his projected wounds, the caretaker of his pain. She absorbs what he will not integrate. And here lies the tragedy. Because these men aren't bad, but they become harmful when they refuse responsibility for their own emotional lives. They become harmful when they demand to be loved while staying hidden, when they crave connection but fear intimacy, when they offer desire but cannot offer depth. It is the collective shadow of masculinity that Jung found most concerning. A pattern passed down through centuries. Men taught to conquer, to perform, to suppress, taught to lead, but not to listen, to dominate but not to reflect, to chase but never to receive. These scripts do not create wholeness, they create performance. And behind the performance, a frightened soul. A man disconnected from his own center. Jung called this the disintegration of the masculine principle. Not its weakness, but its exile, its denial, its refusal to evolve. So what does this look like in real life? It looks like men who ghost instead of having hard conversations. Men who flirt with depth but flee when emotions rise. Men who seem emotionally available at first but disappear the moment you ask for something real. Men who claim they're working on themselves but never actually go to therapy, read, reflect, or apologize meaningfully. These men often surround themselves with vague spiritual language. They talk about energy, vibes, growth, but none of it is rooted, none of it is integrated. Because reading about growth is not growth. Performing vulnerability is not the same as becoming vulnerable. And Jung saw this clearly. The ego can mimic transformation. It can copy the language of awakening without ever surrendering to its truth. And when that happens, when a man's ego pretends to be conscious, becomes more dangerous than the one who is simply unaware. Why? Because now he believes his own illusion. He believes he's a good man. He believes he's not like the others. He believes that the problem must be you. Too emotional, too reactive, too insecure. And suddenly, the woman who feels unsafe, is framed as the one causing the instability. This reversal is not accidental. It is the psyche's desperate attempt to avoid shame. And immature men will do anything to avoid that shame, even if it means distorting reality, even if it means gaslighting the woman who is simply asking for emotional presence. Jung warned that everything we do not make conscious will come back as fate, and these men be refusing to face their shadow secrete the very fate they fear most. They sabotage love. They break trust. They end up alone, wondering why nothing lasts. But they never look in the mirror long enough to see the common thread. And while they distract themselves with work, sex, ambition, or self-righteousness, their inner boy remains buried, unseen, screaming in the basement of their unconscious. Until they turn toward that pain, they will not grow. Until they reclaim their vulnerability, they will not mature. Until they stop projecting their wounds onto others, they will never love in a way that does not hurt. So what is the collective shadow of men? It is the inheritance of disconnection. It is the normalization of emotional neglect. It is the cultural permission to bypass pain in favor of control. It is the glorification of being strong without ever being real. And women, consciously or not, often carry the burden of that shadow. They become the ones who feel too much, love too hard, wait too long. They believe wrongly that if they just hold space a little more, he will wake up. That if they just love him a little deeper, he will arrive. But he won't. Not until he chooses to do the work. Not until he chooses to meet himself in the dark. Because here's the truth Jung knew. No one can make someone else mature. No one can force someone into wholeness. Love cannot replace inner work. And patience cannot fix what avoidance created. So if you've been loving an emotionally immature manlet, this be your clarity. It is not your job to raise him, to teach him empathy, to carry his pain, to be the adult in a relationship where he insists on staying a child. You are not his mother. You are not his mirror. You are not his medicine. You are a woman with a soul of her own. And your soul deserves to be met, not managed, not mirrored, not minimized, but truly, fully, fiercely met by someone who has met himself first. Until then, no matter how much potential he has, is still a danger to the woman who dares to love him more than he loves truth. Jung didn't write these words to shame men. He wrote them to awaken them. But the question is, how many are listening? She thought it was love. The pull, the intensity, the ache when he pulled away. The nights of deep conversation followed by days of silence. The way he'd look at her as if she was the only woman in the world, until the next moment when she felt completely invisible. It felt familiar. It felt like a movie. And that's exactly what made it so dangerous. Carl Jung warned that most people do not live their lives. They act out unconscious scripts, archetypes, patterns so deeply rooted in the collective unconscious that we don't even realize we're playing roles written long before we were born. And when it comes to love, women are often drawn not to what's real, but to what's mythic, what's symbolic, what's unresolved in their own psyche. This is not a flaw, it's an invitation, but only if you can recognize what's actually happening beneath the surface. Too many women are unconsciously living out the archetype of the Redeemer, the one who believes her love can heal, can fix, can transform the broken man. She believes if she just gives enough, waits long enough, sacrifices deeply enough, the man will finally become the one he was always meant to be. This archetype is ancient, rooted in religious myths, fairy tales, ancestral longing. It's the idea that love must cost something to be real, that pain is a sign of depth, that suffering earns salvation. But Jung was clear. Anything unconscious eventually becomes a trap, and the Redeemer woman falls into this trap over and over again, drawn to men who reflect not her worth, but her wound. Men who carry the energy of the lost king, the wounded warrior, the tormented genius. They're seductive, mysterious, emotionally unavailable. They hint at greatness, but live in chaos. And instead of choosing men who are ready, women in this archetype choose men who need them because it makes them feel worthy. But here's the truth. It is not your job to be the answer to a man's avoidance of himself. The moment a woman begins to awaken, she starts to feel it. The misalignment, the exhaustion, the way her intuition shrinks in the presence of someone who claims to love her but never actually sees her. She begins to question the stories she's been fed. That love is about enduring. That passion is supposed to feel like anxiety. That intensity is a substitute for intimacy. And then comes the most radical moment of all. When she finally stops asking, "Why doesn't he choose me?" and begins asking, "Why did I choose him?" That shift is the beginning of consciousness. Jung called it withdrawing the projection. It means taking back your power from the person you've cast in your inner drama. It means realizing he was never the dream, he was the symbol, a mirror for something unresolved inside you. Perhaps the father you never impressed, the older brother who dismissed your emotions. The culture that taught you your value lies in how much you endure, how much you serve, how much you stay silent. The woman who awakens begins to see that she's been choosing from her shadow. And once she sees it, she can no longer stay the same. She stops romanticizing inconsistency. She stops calling confusion chemistry. She stops excusing emotional negligence as trauma he's working through. And most importantly, she stops betraying her own needs for the illusion of love. Because real love does not require self-abandonment. One of the most damaging archetypes modern women carry is the cool girl. The woman who doesn't ask for too much, who tolerates ambiguity, who pretends to be fine with half commitments and low investment. She believes that being easygoing will make her lovable, that not expressing needs will make her more desirable. But Jung would say she is not being herself, she is wearing a persona. A mask crafted to be accepted by a man who cannot meet her real self. Eventually, the mask breaks. And when it does, she feels shame. But what she must feel is rage not at him, but at the system inside her that taught her to shrink in order to be seen. The woman who awakens reclaims that rage, not to destroy, but to redefine. She begins to see how her emotional labor has kept her from her own creativity, her own voice, her own mission. She starts to invest the energy she once gave to unavailable men into building a life rooted in truth. She no longer waits for permission to be chosen, she chooses herself. She no longer auditions for love, she defines it on her own terms. And in doing so, she breaks the archetype. This is not a comfortable path. There will be loneliness. There will be moments of doubt, nostalgia, grief. The memory of what could have been will tempt her to return to old dynamics. But she will remember that what could have been was never real. It was the projection of a wounded hope onto a man who was never ready to hold it. What she seeks now is not fantasy, it's reciprocity. And that's where a new archetype begins to form within her. Jung would call this the sovereign feminine, a woman who is both heart and boundary, depth and discernment. She is no longer drawn to potential. She is aligned with presence. She is not interested in being needed. She seeks to be met, fully, consciously, equally. This woman still loves deeply but no longer recklessly. She still longs but not from lack. She desires a man not to rescue or complete her, but to walk beside her. Not as a savior, not as a student, but as a sovereign of his own inner world. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. The awakened woman has stopped confusing sacrifice with intimacy. She no longer fears her own standards. She no longer apologizes for needing what she needs. And as a result, she no longer attracts men who fear depth, who weaponize silence, who punish emotion, who run from truth. Instead, she becomes a filter. Her energy, no longer leaking everywhere, becomes magnetic only to those ready to meet her frequency. This is what liberation looks like, but it begins in the shadow. It begins with the willingness to question what you were told love should feel like, to look honestly at the patterns in your relationships, To stop blaming yourself for their failures and start taking radical responsibility for your choices. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were just speaking a language some men refuse to learn. And now, you speak a new one. One rooted in clarity, courage, and the fierce tenderness of a woman who has come home to herself. Love, real love, will not require you to disappear. It will not ask you to shrink, to wait, to hope someone heals while you wither. Love will recognize you because you will recognize yourself first. And that recognition is what changes everything. There is a question many women ask themselves, often in quiet moments, often with tears not of heartbreak, but of exhaustion. Why do so many men stay emotionally shallow? Not unintelligent, not incapable, just emotionally unavailable, distant, unrooted in any true inner world. Carl Jung's work offers a painful but necessary answer, because staying shallow is safer than becoming whole. Emotional depth requires one thing above all confrontation. The confrontation with pain, with failure, with childhood wounds, with guilt, with fear. And many men, shaped by generations of conditioning, patriarchal ideals, and psychological suppression, have been taught to run from that confrontation at all costs. They are not taught to feel, they are taught to perform. From a young age, boys are told, directly or indirectly, that emotions are a liability, that tears are weakness, that expressing fear makes you a target, that tenderness is softness, and softness is to be avoided. Instead, they are praised for control, for logic, for ambition, for competition. Their worth is measured not by how well they know themselves, but by how well they succeed outside of themselves. By adulthood, many men are strangers to their inner world. They may know how to talk about feelings in theory. They may even read about trauma, listen to podcasts, discuss vulnerability. But when a real moment of emotional intensity arises, they freeze, or deflect, or shut down. Because theory is safe, experience is not. Jung warned that the ego will do anything to avoid the unknown. And nothing is more unknown to the emotionally shallow man than his own inner life. To feel deeply would require him to break the identity he's spent years constructing. An identity based on control, on certainty, on appearing strong. But strength without depth is hollow. And many men would rather live hollow than be seen as weak. Even if it costs them love. Even if it costs them their souls. So they choose partners, jobs, friends, and routines that protect their shallowness. Not consciously, but instinctively. Because proximity to an emotionally available person threatens their survival strategy. It threatens their story of who they are. And when they do fall for someone who invites them to go deeper, someone who mirrors their potential instead of their protection, they begin to unravel. The intimacy becomes overwhelming. The love starts to feel dangerous. Not because she's done anything wrong, but because she represents everything they've been avoiding. And so they sabotage it, not with cruelty, but with silence, with confusion, with inconsistency. They retreat into their minds, into their work, into distractions. They start to create distance emotionally, physically, psychologically, because to stay close would mean facing the very parts of themselves they've disowned. This is why emotionally shallow men are so frustrating to love. Because on some level they know they are not showing up fully. They know they are withholding, but they don't know how to stop. They've built a life around avoidance, and now that avoidance feels like identity. Jung would call this the shadow self, the parts of the psyche that we refuse to accept and therefore project onto others. These men often project their unacknowledged vulnerability onto the women they love, labeling them as too emotional, too intense, or too needy. They reduce emotional depth to irrationality, so they can justify their detachment. But what they're really doing is defending themselves from themselves. They fear what they might find if they open that door. They fear the grief that hasn't been grieved, the anger that hasn't been named, the sadness that's been buried under years of forced stoicism. They fear that once they begin to feel, they won't be able to stop. that the dam will break, that they will be consumed. So instead, they stay at the surface, where feelings are manageable, where everything can be explained, where love is kept at a distance, safe, predictable, impersonal. But this shallowness comes at a price. These men rarely experience true intimacy. They may enjoy connection, but they never truly merge. They may be admired, but never truly known. They may go through life with success and accolades, but there is a dullness beneath it, a flatness they can't name. And eventually, they become lonely, profoundly lonely, even in relationships, because a man who cannot feel cannot bond. He may share space, a bed, a conversation, but not himself, not his truth, not his core. Women often internalize this. They believe they are the problem, that if they were more patient, more supportive, more loving, he would open. But the truth is, this isn't about her. It's about his relationship with his own psyche. You cannot invite someone to meet you in a place they've never entered within themselves. And many men are still standing outside their own emotional threshold, terrified of what they might find if they go in. It takes deep courage to feel. It takes immense strength to unravel the armor, to cry with another human being, to say, "I'm scared, I don't know," or "I'm hurting." Most men were never shown how to do this. Not by their fathers, not by society. Sometimes, not even by their mothers, who unknowingly reinforced the message, be good, be strong, be self-sufficient. So now we have generations of men who are emotionally underdeveloped, yet spiritually starving. Jung believed that what we suppress doesn't disappear, it becomes fate. The man who refuses to do his inner work eventually ends up consumed by the very pain he tried to outrun. His relationships fail. His friendships lack depth. His joy feels numb. He may function, but he never thrives. And what of the women who love them? They become teachers of pain, witnesses to avoidance, holders of emotional labor that was never theirs to carry. But there is hope, because some men do choose to step in, to stop pretending, to dismantle the mask, to feel everything they were once told was dangerous. And when they do, something extraordinary happens. They begin to live, fully, consciously, with heart and presence. They become the kind of men who do not fear emotion but honor it, who do not run from love but bow to its depth. But this transformation cannot be forced. It must be chosen. And until it is, many men will continue to live at the surface, afraid of drowning in the very waters that could have set them free. Carl Jung did not teach us to fear the darkness. He taught us to understand it. He believed that the shadow, the hidden, denied, repressed parts of the psyche is not evil. It is simply unconscious. It is where we store everything we were told not to feel, not to be, not to express. And for both men and women, true wholeness cannot exist until we integrate that shadow. But while much has been said about the masculine shadow rage, control, emotional detachmentless attention is given to the forgotten power of the feminine, especially the original, feminine energy that Jung called the anima. Jung believed that every man carries within him a feminine principle, just as every woman carries a masculine one. These are not genders. These are archetypal energies. The feminine intuition, receptivity, emotion, nurturance, sensuality, chaos. Mystery is not a weakness. It is a vital psychological force. And when a man is disconnected from his own feminine core, he cannot relate to women in a conscious way. He sees them through projection, not presence. This is why so many women find themselves in relationships where they are not met, not felt, not truly seen. The man is looking at her through the lens of his unmet anima, expecting her to complete what he has refused to awaken within himself. So what does this mean in practice? It means that the most important thing a woman can do when choosing a man is not to ask, "Does he love me?" but "Can he meet me in the depths?" Because love, in the absence of depth, becomes dependency. It becomes a performance, a pattern, a projection. And the man who has not integrated his shadow, who has not made peace with his feminine energy, will always seek a woman not to meet, but to complete him. But he will never tell her this. He may not even know it. He will say he loves her. He will say she is everything he's ever wanted, and for a time, he may truly believe it. But over time, the relationship begins to crumble, not because of conflict, but because of absence. His absence. He cannot stay emotionally present in a space he has never visited within himself. This is why Jung insisted on individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the self. For a man, this means learning to feel, to intuit, to nurture, to soften. It means descending into his own unconscious, confronting the pain he has ignored, embracing the parts of himself he was told were unmanly, irrational, or weak. Only then can he show up in relationship not as a role, but as a man of substance. So, how does a woman recognize such a man? She doesn't look for perfection, she looks for presence. She doesn't look for someone who performs vulnerability with poetic words. She looks for someone who sits in silence with her grief and doesn't flinch. She looks for a man who is not afraid of emotion, who doesn't need to fix her sadness, but who respects it. A man who doesn't run when discomfort arises, but leans in, not to control, not to dominate, but to understand. He will not be loud, but his energy will be unmistakable. He does not chase the thrill of conquest. He cherishes the safety of truth. He has felt his own pain, so he does not project it. He has embraced his own softness, so he does not fear hers. He does not need to be the hero of her story, because he is already the author of his own. This man exists, but he is not common, because depth is not built by chance. It is carved through fire, through heartbreak, through failure, through introspection. The man of depth has been broken, but he did not become bitter. He questioned and kept questioning. He turned inward, even when the world told him to look outward. He has died many small deaths, and because of this, he has been reborn. So what does it require of the woman? That she stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing. Choosing from wisdom, not longing, from clarity, not chemistry. She must know her own shadow, her own longing to be saved, her own hunger for validation, her own fear of abandonment. Not to reject these parts, but to integrate them. Because the woman who knows herself deeply cannot be seduced by a shallow man. She may feel the pull, but she will not stay, because she knows what depth feels like now. It feels like steadiness, like safety, like an honest no instead of a manipulative maybe. Like silence that holds space, not silence that creates fear. Like questions that matter, like eyes that don't just scan your body but search your soul. And she will no longer compromise. Not because she is bitter, not because she hates men, but because she has reclaimed her original feminine power, the part of her that knows without logic, that feels without apology. That demands truth, not out of entitlement, but out of sacred alignment. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of wholeness. It's not about fixing the broken parts. It's about welcoming them home. When a man has welcomed his feminine energy, when he no longer fears the inner water, she becomes safe. Not safe because he's perfect, safe because he's honest, present, awake. And when a woman has claimed her intuitive wisdom, when she no longer sacrifices herself for potential, she becomes sovereign, not hard, not guarded, but grounded in her worth. Together, they do not complete each other. They meet each other, not in fantasy, not in projection, but in the real, sacred space, where shadow and light are both allowed, where masks fall, where healing happens, where the soul is finally mirrored back. So to every woman wondering how to choose a man of depth, do not look for fireworks, look for resonance. Do not ask, does he want me? Ask, does he know himself? Do not settle for performance. Wait for presence. Because when a man has truly met his shadow, he will not fear yours. He will hold you, not in possession, but in reverence. And that is what you deserve. That is what Jung pointed us toward. Not romance, not perfection, but awakening. Choose from that place, and everything changes. You were never asking for too much. You were asking for presence, for truth, for someone who could hold your depth without fear. And if that felt like a burden to the men you've known, it was not because you were too deep, it was because they refused to leave the surface. Carl Jung believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. But now, you see the pattern, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. So here is your invitation. Stop explaining your worth. Stop waiting for potential. Stop romanticizing pain. Choose differently. Choose from your wholeness, not your hunger. And to every woman watching, if this message stirred something in you, it's not coincidence. It's your inner voice calling you back to yourself. So leave a comment below and say, I remember who I am. Share this video with someone who needs it. And subscribe, because we're only getting started. This isn't just about relationships. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were never meant to be given away. You don't need saving. You need truth. And it starts now.